for inviting me, and thanks to John for his very warm welcome. Maybe I can just start by reciprocating my appreciation of John's work as a colleague. Those of you who, obviously you live in Southport, you know what he does locally for the community. I can tell you he's a very, very effective spokesman for Southport in Parliament, and he's frequently on his feet from Prime Minister's questions, through debates, speaking up for the town, and indeed for seaside communities generally, because there are some common elements here, and he's very effective in that role. And I'm very pleased he's actually part of my team, my Treasury team in Parliament, not least because one of his key roles, I don't know whether he's also done this much in Southport, is a member of probably the most important of the various select committees that oversee government, which is the Public Accounts Committee. These are the guys who root through government spending and find out where all the billions are wasted. And that's something John does very effectively, and it's that understanding which makes a major contribution to the work that I and my team do, so I'd like to thank him. It's good to be back in Southport. This is the second time I've been here. 2003, I was here last. I think Rachel, my wife, and I spent a long time unsuccessfully trying to find the sea. But you won't notice this because you live here, but I was just very struck. This is a really nice town, and I was very struck actually by how much it had changed in the last 5 years. That very nice marine lake and the bridge and the new conference centre. There's a lot happening here. Lots of refurbishment and lots to make it more attractive. So I don't know who to applaud for that, but if people in the room have been responsible, it clearly made a difference. But I just want to talk about the bigger picture of what's actually going on. It actually isn't terribly clear what's going on. You get very, very different accounts of what's going on in Britain, in the economy, depending on who you talk to, where you are. I find if I'm in London, where there is a boom in luxury house prices, the stock market's booming, a lot of people are making a lot of money, you get the sense that we're at the peak of the boom. But in many provincial towns and cities, people are very, very depressed and worried and don't see where recovery is going to come from. And I think the announcement during this week, when we at last discovered that Britain isn't formally in a recession, but is just bouncing along the bottom, has actually in many ways deflated a lot of the optimism that was beginning to generate that this crisis was over, because it clearly isn't. Now I use a metaphor, I probably use it too much, but I'm going to go to town on it tomorrow morning, and I don't know whether you know, but I have a regular weekly column in the Mail on Sunday. And I'm going to talk about this metaphor at great length, which is about Britain having had the economic equivalent of a heart attack. It's essentially what's happened. Because the economy goes up and down. Those who've been around a while will know we've had booms and busts and recessions, and it leaves some people with bad experiences of unemployment. The housing market goes up and down, and then it goes away. And I would guess places like Southport to some extent insulated from these little cycles we have, which are very dramatic at the time. But what's happened this time is something much more fundamental, and I fear much more long-lasting, and something needing much more radical change, which we haven't yet begun to tackle, to be frank. There's just a hope and a prayer at the moment that everything will just sort of stabilise, get back to something like normal, but it's not going to happen. What essentially has happened is we've had this massive crash. The banking system effectively collapsed like a giant pack of cards. And it collapsed for several reasons, one of which was that they were involved, well, some of them, not all of them, there are some very responsible banks, but some of them were involved in extremely reckless lending, particularly mortgage lending. In the UK, banks like HBOS and Northern Rock, also it's happened in the United States, lending against a gigantic bubble in property prices, which was completely unreal, and people were encouraged to take on enormous amounts of debt. It's worth reflecting on the fact that in the UK we now have the highest level of debt, personal debt, I'm not talking about the government, but companies, household debt, in relation to our income than any country in the Western world. It's mainly young families, pensioners are not in that position normally, but young families have enormous burden of personal debt. And it was acquired against this property bubble. The banks lent very, very freely, and they got into serious trouble because they overlent. And in addition to that, the banks engaged in very, very risky experience with very complicated bits of paper, credit default swaps and so on, where they hadn't actually calculated properly the risks of what they were doing. Extraordinarily clever people processing this paper, making lots of money out of it, but building up what effectively amounted to large-scale pyramid selling. And that now has collapsed. The banking collapsed. Now the good news is that, unlike in 1929, when we last had something similar, interwar period, the patient hasn't died. The British economy is still going, and it's going for several reasons. The main reason being that the government here, Central Bank, Bank of England, and equivalent bodies in other countries did some remarkable things to keep the body alive. And we're still living with those. It's like, going back to my metaphor about the heart attack victim, it's rushed into hospital, got into the intensive care unit, got all the drips established and new medicines and steroids pumped in, and that's essentially what's happened to the economy. We've had interest rates cut to virtually zero, which is bad news if you're a pensioner with a lot of savings, but in terms of keeping an economy with a major shock, it's helped to get it going. We've had the artificial creation of money on a very, very large scale, something that most of us never dreamed would ever happen. I mean, I've taught students about this out of textbooks as a theory, but it's never happened before in the real world. We've had the government running enormous deficits, staggering deficits, still are, on a scale that, again, we never thought feasible, and we're going to have to pay for that now, and I'll come to that in a moment. We've had the banking system half nationalised, and we've also had a massive devaluation of the currency, which people haven't really noticed if they live here, but if you go on the continent, you're certainly aware of it. 25–30% devaluation. And all those things have made a difference, and they've kept the patient alive, and that's why the British economy, instead of continuing to fall, is now stabilised. But it's stabilised at a rather low level. And as a country, we are now 5–6% poorer, all of us, than we were a year ago, because we've had a year's fall in production, sort of made us all poorer. It actually, at the end of it, will be worse than that, because it will take a long time to catch up again, and there will be a collective loss of wealth for the country. And the argument for the next few years is partly going to be how that's all shared out. I mean, who's going to pay for it? We haven't yet got round to facing that question. So what's the outlook? Well, as I say, the good news is that the patient's still alive, the economy is still functioning. You look down the high street here, people are still shopping, the bank machines are still operating, and that's the patient's still alive. So in that sense, that's the good news. And it's happening in other parts of the world on a spectacular scale. Places like China and India are now growing very rapidly indeed, and you're beginning to get a sort of recovery in Germany and France, though other bits of Europe are in terrible shape, and the United States is also beginning to turn the corner as well. So that's the sign of some kind of stabilisation taking place. But I wouldn't rush out and say this problem's over, we can start thinking about other things. I don't want to fill you with doom and gloom, but there are a whole set of problems ahead, and I think if we're realistic and responsible, we have to think about those problems and see how we're going to deal with them. See, in the coming few years, all kind of things have got to be faced. First of all, this patient's been kept alive through these so-called monetary steroids, this quantitative easing, the creation of money, and that's going to stop. And nobody knows what will happen when it does stop, because it's an experiment, it's never been done before. But at the end of March, or the end of June, that will cease. Probably later this year you may begin to see an increase in interest rates. Certainly next year. That will be good news for people who've got bank deposits, but pretty bad news if you're on a mortgage and you're just struggling to keep going, part-time working, as a lot of people are. We've got a banking system which still isn't functioning properly. Those of you who deal with RBS and HBOS and the rest of them will have a bit of a feel of this, but they lurch from extreme recklessness to extreme conservatism, very reluctant to lend. Again, I don't know what the position is like in Southport if you're a small, medium-sized company, but all my experiences are that people I deal with, they go along to their banks, who are very reluctant to lend, very reluctant to keep their working capital going, certainly virtually impossible to raise money for new ventures, or they will lend, but they'll lend on very restrictive terms, very big arrangement fees, or they will demand that the house is pledged against as security against the loan. So for sole traders and small business, life is very tough because of the way the banks have changed their behaviour, and it's preventing any real strong recovery getting off the ground. But the real problem that is now looming over us, and this is in a way part of the background to this coming election, will be this enormous problem with the government budget deficit. Because basically what's happened is that, and I'm trying to put this in a kind of non-political way, I mean, you can say it's all Gordon Brown's fault or whatever, I mean, there will be a lot of that in the election, but I just want to try to be a bit detached about it. I mean, essentially what's happened is that the government has taken the costs, a lot of the costs of this crash, onto its own books. And of course, it's created in the process this enormous deficit, which will then have to be corrected. If just a couple of figures are worth bearing in mind, I don't want to blind you with statistics, but the one is 35%, that's the share of the economy that's now collected in tax. And those of you who are my generation will remember somebody called Harold Macmillan. And in fact, the amount of tax revenue that the government's now collecting is lower than at any time since Harold Macmillan was the Prime Minister. We now live in a low-tax economy. Now, I know nobody here feels that. I certainly don't feel it. And it's not a low-tax economy by design. It's just that large chunks of tax have just disappeared. They disappeared because of the collapse of the banking system and, to some extent, the collapse of the housing bubble, though that's mysteriously refloating. So we've had a big collapse of tax revenue, 35% of GDP, and then public spending is about 48% of GDP. It's kept rising because the government felt, and I think we felt rightly, had to keep the economy going in the recession. Also, more people are now out of work, they're having to be supported through the welfare system. So public spending's rising, 48%. Well, the difference, 48 minus 35 is 13. 13% of the economy is having to be borrowed. Just think about that, and these figures are abstract, but it's the equivalent of the defence budget and the health service budget and quite a lot else being borrowed every year. That's what's happening at the moment, at 170 billion in total. At the moment, in this very strange, weird sort of hospital environment that we're in, the government is finding it easy to finance that. They are borrowing that amount of money, partly because of this strange thing that's going on with the creation of money. The government is actually lending to itself and writing a little account in the Bank of England. So it isn't really borrowing it, it's borrowing from itself, which is a bit of a trick, really. But eventually they'll have to borrow all of it, and that will be a bit of a challenge. But it is borrowing staggering amounts of money, as are the Americans. And the markets at the moment are willing to lend, and they're lending at very low rates of interest.
I'd like to ask Mr. Cable's opinion on government quangos. I run one of the largest educational consultancies in the country, and my main competitor are government quangos. In the press this week it says that at the moment government quangos are £34 billion, which is half the defence budget, and they actually think that it's near as £60 billion that are spent on government quangos at the moment, which is half the budget of the National Health Service. I'd just like to know if what is the policy of the Lib Debs on government quangos. Because, I mean, if the Lib Debs are going to get rid of government quangos, I might do quite well in my business, because they are my competitor. What the government offers my consultancy is free consultancy, you see. So I'd like to know your opinion on government quangos. Would a Lib Deb government do away with government quangos? And if so, which ones would they consider to be a priority to maintain?
Well, we certainly believe that the quango state has got out of control, that there are far too many. It isn't just that they spend a lot of money and that there are a lot of them, but they're actually often not accountable to anybody. You know, they award themselves very large salaries and bonuses, and nobody's really, government isn't really in control. I mean, John's committee, in an indirect way, keeps some oversight on them, but there is very little. It's lack of accountability and waste are both a big issue. But then there is a more specific question, well, where do you start getting rid of it? And this, you then of course provoke big resistance. I mean, I've actually gone around the country saying, giving lists of these things that I think should be got rid of. I'll just a couple of examples, partly to show how difficult it is. One was the Learnings and Skills Council. Incredibly wasteful organisation, unbelievably wasteful organisation. But the government did scrap the Learnings and Skills Council a year ago, and they created 3 quangos to do what it was doing before. So we're actually gone backwards. With luck, a lot of its work can be absorbed into local councils. Is it Lancashire County Council that does education? To make sure that councils do the FE work, for example, you don't need to do it at that level. A lot of employers, from my experience, don't value even the training work, because basically the government quango sets the training. They actually pay for training that they think is appropriate, not what employers want. So it's not demand-led. So that's one, the Learning Skills Council area. There's a lot of waste in that field. The second, I know because my wife is a small farmer, there's vast amounts of quangos in the agricultural sector, terribly wasteful. Another, which but also illustrates the difficulty, I went around arguing a year or 2 years ago that the RDAs should be got rid of, because they spend $2 billion a year. And then they started their fight back, and I started being invited to have lunch with them. They told me that what phenomenal amount of good they did.
It was a good use of their money, though, wasn't it?
They produced very glossy reports prepared by consultants telling me how invaluable they were. And I think I've now got to the point of agreeing that 1 or 2 of them might actually be doing some good. The North East England one, Yorkshire Forward, seems to have quite a few business supporters. And John's just told me that the North West has something to be said for it. But why you need regional development agents for the South East of England, which is booming anyway, or the East of England, or London, is just, beyond understanding. So we could get rid of a lot of them and cut a lot of the things they do. So quangos, regulation and health and safety. There is an issue here. I think we need to be a bit careful about being carried along by apocryphal stories from the Sun. There's these. Some of these things are true, and some. I think the idea about fishermen having to wear hairnets was just made up. But there are some of the things that are true, and there is a lot of wasteful and foolish problems in the health and safety field. But very often when you actually look into these things, the problem is not the health and safety executive, it's the law, it's public liability insurance. One of the reasons why employers and schools and other organisations are often do very silly things, like closing school playgrounds and not allowing children to play, is because they're terrified, or the governors are terrified, that somebody will sue them. And the insurance cost to protect yourself against being sued is astronomical. And a lot of that traces back to the no-win, no-fee system of legal representation. A lot of that's because there's no legal aid for civil cases anymore. So a lot of it's to do with the compensation system within the legal profession rather than health and safety executive. And I think one has to remind ourselves that there are a lot of British workers who do get killed on building sites. And it is right that, you know, basic things like wearing helmets, you know, that these things are there and they're enforced. So, you know, I do agree with you, it's way over the top, but I think we should be careful not to get too carried away with it.
I mean, clearly the last 30 years there's an impression of a market completely unfettered running riot. And I just wonder if what you've outlined to us, Vince, in relation to Europe as well, is really a return to a more sensible overlooking of government over the markets and stopping that free-for-all. And if there is a model emerging, what is it?
Right, market system. Yes, well, I think we're talking here specifically about financial services industry, which did get completely out of control. There was regulation. People often forget this. The banking sector, the financial services sector, is quite heavily regulated. It was already regulated. But the problem was that the people who did it, the Financial Services Authority in the UK, didn't regulate it properly. They didn't supervise the banks. I mean, what shocked me was some of us knew, we could see that there were problems building up in Northern Rock, for example. And that the FSA was responsible for regulating them, and they didn't see a problem, and even when it was pointed out to them, they wouldn't deal with it. I recall vividly to this day, on the day before the queues started forming outside Northern Rock, I had a personal telephone call from the chairman of the financial regulatory body saying, what are you doing going on television talking about this bank being a problem? We've looked at that bank and we think it is absolutely safe and solid. We don't see any problems with it. Why are you creating all this scare, you know? But some of us have been pointing out for 6 months, a year, that these 125% mortgages were completely insane, and were going to lead to them becoming insolvent. And not just me, you know, the Daily Mail and various other people that were onto this a long time ago, but the regulators didn't see it or didn't act on it. So it isn't a question of just a free-for-all. It wasn't just a free-for-all. There was regulation, but it was incompetent regulation, and putting that right is actually quite tricky.
Every country seems to want to get back to growth. Well, growth it depends on endless resources and endless amount of cheap labour. And how long is that sustainable? The second question is, as a businessman, I find that enterprise is being stifled by excessive health and safety regulations and excessive government red tape, big government gone mad. Do you think you could free up local businesses to actually generate the money we need?
I think there are two aspects to this. First of all, there is now, what everybody says is, why don't we have export-led growth? You know, this is the way forward. Manufacturing companies exporting, that's how the British economy will recover. I think that's actually, on one level, quite sensible. But every single country in the world is now saying, let's have export-led growth. Well, if you think about it logically, unless we can find a way of exporting to the moon, that can't happen, because one country's exports are going to be somebody else's imports, so it can't happen. And it's just an illusion to believe that recovery can take place in that form. But I think your point was a slightly different one, which was actually that growth in a traditional form can be very damaging to the environment, and we need to be careful of not reproducing a lot of the environmental damage we had in the past. I did give you a brief list of some of the ways we wanted to raise taxes in order to cut taxes on the low paid. One of the things I didn't mention to you, we think there is a role for green taxes on aviation particularly, which is actually quite undertaxed. It's absolutely ludicrous that you can fly to Newcastle from London or to Paris for about a quarter of what it costs on the train. Absolutely ludicrous. And that's partly because of the tax system. So you're right, we can't just have traditional forms of growth that deplete resources and cause environmental damage.
Okay, next 3 questions. Let's turn it back there.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for coming along.